Hello aspirants, welcome to Epitome IAS. This is Mansoor. So as a part of this Ncrt series, we have started 8th class Ncrt. In 8th class Ncrt, so far we have discussed 2 chapters. So in today's class, we are going to see chapter number 3. So if you see here, the PDF which I am having, it might be saying that it is chapter number 4, but the point here is, in updated Ncrt, agriculture would be the 3rd chapter. So in old Ncrt, the 3rd chapter was regarding minerals. Okay. So as you know, when Ncrt got updated, that particular chapter has been removed, and in place of that minerals, we are having agriculture as chapter number 3. Okay. Right. So without any further delay, we will be moving into this chapter. So in this particular chapter, we are going to see what is meant by agriculture, what is the basic definition of agriculture, and what are the different types of cultures we are having, like pisciculture, what is meant by pisciculture, what is meant by horticulture. All these things we will be learning in this chapter. And so with that, in this particular chapter, we will be seeing some other things. We will be seeing what are the activities that were there when one raw material was completely converted into the final product. So what are those kinds of activities, and we will be seeing what are the different types of farming that we are having in India, and what are the different types of farm systems that we are having, and we will be comparing farming in India with farming with USA. Okay, so these are the small things that we are going to cover in this 8th class Ncrt. So before starting that, so we will be seeing what is the definition of agriculture. So what is meant by agriculture? Agriculture is nothing but it is a science. Okay, agriculture is a science. It is an art of cultivation on soil, or we can tell that it is a science and art of cultivation on land. So what we are going to do, what we are getting output from this cultivation, we will be getting crops, we will be getting plants, we will be getting fruits, whatever it is. The point here is the science and the art which is involved in cultivation on land, and in returns we will be getting we will be raising crops, and we will be rearing livestock. Okay, this is the basic definition of agriculture, right? So if you see here in this particular chapter, he has given some other cultures or some other things which we should understand. Okay, so here we should understand what is meant by sericulture. Sericulture is nothing but, see, first of all, we understood what is meant by agriculture. We understood that it is nothing but the science and art of cultivation on soil, raising crops and rearing livestock. And this particular agriculture, we call it as an farming. Now there is one more thing, that is a sericulture. What is meant by sericulture? Sericulture is nothing but commercial rearing of silkworms. So in this particular sericulture, we will be generating, or we will be cultivating, or we will be rearing silkworms. So what happens? Through these silkworms, we will be generating the silk. Okay. So the point here is, this sericulture will be acting as supplement. That means it will be acting as supplement to the income of farmer. What does it mean? It means that if you are doing agriculture, parallelly if you are doing sericulture, through this sericulture also you can get income. So in this sericulture, the point to be remembered is, we will be rearing silkworms. Now, what is meant by pisciculture? So pisciculture is nothing but breeding of fish in specially constructed tanks and ponds. So if you see, even Telangana government has in last government's regime, it has mainly focused on pond fishes. That means fishes which were grown in inland areas. Either it might be in ponds, either it might be in tanks. Okay, so that particular thing we call it as an pisciculture. Then viticulture. What is meant by viticulture? Viticulture is nothing but cultivation of grapes. Okay, if you see some western countries, or if you see the north western countries, majority of countries focus on cultivation of grapes. Through these grapes, they will be producing the wine. Okay, even in India, we cultivate grapes. The cultivation of grapes, we call that particular thing as viticulture. Then the fourth important thing is horticulture. What is meant by horticulture? Horticulture is nothing but growing of vegetables, flowers and fruits. So why we would be growing? 2 reasons. One for personal use, second for commercial use. So the commercial growing or the commercial production of Vegetables, flowers and fruits, we call that particular thing as horticulture. Okay, so these are the different types of cultures that we are having, different types of things we should understand. So there is a probability that he might be asking in match the following types of questions in prelims. So if you are able to understand what is meant by horticulture, sericulture, pisciculture, viticulture, that kind of question could be answered very easily, right? Now coming back to the chapter, see, whenever there is a production of a raw material, for suppose if there is a production of or cultivation of what do we say, wheat or rice or paddy. So what we will be doing, we will be transforming that particular rice to and product that particular paddy to rice. So the point here is, what I'm trying to tell you is, the plant product which was cultivated is finally transformed into finished product. Okay, now in this transformation journey, we would be having three kinds of activities, or we can tell that the entire transformation journey of a plant product to the final product, we can tell that there are three kinds of activities that were involved. So what are those three kinds of activities? If you see here, these three kinds of activities, and the point here to be noted is, these three kinds of activities are economic activities. Okay, the first activity is obviously primary activity, and second type of activity, economic activity, is secondary activity, and third kind of activity is tertiary activity. Right, now the point here is, what is meant by primary activity? What happens in primary activity? In this primary activity, what we will be doing is, we will be extracting, or we can tell that extraction and production of raw materials will be happening in this particular primary activity. So what is the example for primary activity? If you take example, we can tell that agriculture, then fishing, then mining. Okay, these three things we can call it as an primary activity, or we can call gathering, we can consider gathering as one of the primary activity. Okay, now what happens after once the extraction and production was happened? Once when we extract or when we start producing the raw materials, what we'll be doing? The second step would be processing of those raw materials. So obviously in step 2, that is in secondary activity, what happens? Processing of those extracted raw materials will be happening. So what would be the example? Example would be for secondary activities, we can tell manufacturing of steel, or for suppose if you take bakery, baking of bread, okay, could be the examples of secondary activities. That means all the processing activity which was done on raw materials in order to generate the final product, that particular phase or that particular activity where money has been used or money has been generated, that particular kind of economic activity, we call it as a secondary activity. Now what is meant by tertiary activity? Obviously, see, when the primary activity and secondary activity is taking place, obviously there is or there should be a medium, or there should be a special kind of activity where it will be supporting the both primary as well as secondary activity. That means we can, in simple terms, we can tell that this activity or this economic activity will support primary and secondary activities. How? For suppose, let us take, you are extracting or you are producing paddy. Now you want to convert that paddy into the rice. What is the process involved? Now what is the process involved? Obviously the process involved would be, first we will be producing that paddy, and we will be taking that paddy from farm to the mill. Rice mill. So then what happens? In rice mill, the processing of that paddy would be happening. Now the rice mill, we can call that particular thing as a secondary activity. Now if you see here, when we are transporting or when we are shifting that particular raw material to rice mill, so we need vehicles, we need a lorry, we need a transportation. So the transportation which is helping this primary activity and secondary activity can be called as tertiary activity. And what is one more example? Other example? What would be the other example? For suppose, if you want to start cultivating, right? If you want to start cultivating in a land, obviously you need some money. Okay. So there are many cases where the money with the farmers won't be sufficient. So then what they will be doing? They will be going to the bank, they will be taking loan. And after taking loan, they will start cultivation, they will start producing the raw materials. Then what happens? These raw materials are shifted to the factories, the manufacturing plants. So now if you want to start a manufacturing plant, if you are not having money with you, obviously you will go for a loan. Then again banks will provide money. So the point here is the banking structure is also called as can be taken as example for the tertiary sector. Why? This banking sector is providing some sort of service to the people in primary sector and to the people in secondary sector. Are you getting my point? So because of that particular reason, we can tell that banking is also an example for tertiary activity. Okay. So now the point here is we should understand that when a raw material is converted into the final product, these three economic activities will be taking place. Now, since we are talking about agriculture, now tell me, agriculture comes under which kind of activity? Obviously, primary economic activity, right? Now, if you see this agriculture, first of all, we understood that the point number one is it comes under primary activity. Now, the second point to be understood here is the people in India, majority you can tell that majority percentage of people, nearly some 50% of people are working in agricultural sector, or we can tell that 50% of population is employed in agricultural sector. And the third important point is 2/3 of population in India is dependent on agriculture, directly or indirectly. 2/3% of population in India is depending upon this agricultural sector or primary sector. Here the point is primary sector doesn't mean only agriculture. Okay, you can count this cattle rearing, or you can count the the fishing, all these things. Okay, the point here is 2/3 of population is dependent on agriculture, primary activity, and 50% of population in India is directly or indirectly employed on this particular primary activity. Now, the point here is, see, we are saying that huge amount of population is there in agricultural sector. Then what is the reason for that? Obviously, the reason is very simple. The reason is one, topography. Second, climate. So how topography contribute for a huge amount of agricultural activity? Obviously, plains are very fertile areas, and India, if you see, in North India we are having North Great Plains. Even in South India we are having some sort of plains that were presented. And if you see Ganga plains, Brahmaputra plains, and if you come to southern part of India, there you will be finding Godavari plains, Krishna plains, Kaveri basin, Kaveri plains. So all those things, because of huge availability of the plain area, we will be having agriculture as a suitable thing. And even climate also plays an important role. Since we are having monsoon type of climate, this monsoon type of climate would be playing an important role in agricultural production in India. So these are the two reasons, one topography and second one is climate. Okay. Now the next point to be seen here is farm system. What is meant by farm system? What is meant by farm system, or what is meant by this particular, what is the meaning of this particular thing? See, here the farm system is nothing but there is a certain sort of system that was followed in farming, that was followed in agriculture. So that type of system we call it as a farm system. Now, what are the things or what are the steps that were involved in farm system? See, in farm system, you can see three types of things. First one, inputs. Second one, processing. Then third one is output. So in input, what we are giving, what we are which kind of activities are taken in inputs. First of all, in inputs we can tell that seeds, fertilizers, then machinery and labor. These are the inputs that are needed for cultivation, that are needed for farming. Then after, once when we provided these inputs, the next step would be processing of those products. So in processing, what we'll be doing? In processing, we will be sowing the seeds. See, in inputs we have gathered seeds. Now what we'll be doing? We will be sowing that particular seeds into the land. Okay. So sowing is one of the example, and irrigation, providing irrigation facility is also one of the part of this processing. Then harvesting is one of the important part of the second step, that is processing. Now what happens? Obviously in output, what you will be getting? You will be getting crops. Okay, you will be getting crops, and if you have cultivated paddy, you will be getting paddy as an output and wheat as an output. And if you take dairy products, dairy is an output, dairy products is an output. For example, milk is an example for that. Then you will be getting a wool as an example. Okay, you wool as an output. So the point here is, when these inputs and processing and outputs are done in a systematic way, that particular that particular system we call it as a farm system. That means in any farming culture or in any farming thing, in any cultivation, we should follow these three steps. One, inputs, processing and outputs. This system on a whole we call it as a farm system. So depending upon the amount of cultivation you are doing, obviously the inputs, processing and outputs would be different, but the process is same. Even if you are cultivating 1 acre of land or hundreds of acres of land, it doesn't matter, but you have to follow certain system: input, processing and output. That particular system we call it as a farming system. Now after that, what we have to learn in this particular chapter? So through this particular chapter, the next important topic would be types of farming. If you see the types of farming, we can divide these farming into two types. Again, if you see the types, we can divide the farming into two types. One, subsistence farming. Second, commercial farming. What is meant by subsistence farming? See, subsistence farming is nothing but that particular type of farming where the needs of farmers are considered. And in subsistence farming, the amount of labor would be very high, and the technology which we are using would be very low, and the traditional methods were followed. Are you getting my point? So that particular type of system, that particular type of farming, we call it as a subsistence farming. Now what is meant by commercial farming? In commercial farming, the technology which we are using would be very high and the labor would be less. And here the main agenda of this farming is to generate revenue, to generate income. And in commercial farming, we would be focusing large population. In less area, we would be focusing on large amount of population. So that particular type of farming, we call it as an commercial farming. Now, the point here is, even in subsistence farming, we can divide this subsistence farming into two types. What are they? One, intensive subsistence farming. Then second one is primitive subsistence farming. Okay. Again, this intensive subsistence farming, what happens? In intensive subsistence farming, small amount of land would be there, and they will be focusing on only one area, and they would be employing a huge amount of labors, and the tools that were used for that particular type of farming would be technologically very low. And in this type of farming, climate would be playing a major role. If climate is supporting, obviously that output would be very high. If climate is not supporting, output would be very low. So then what is the example for this type of cultivation? Which kind of crops we can see? We can see rice, we can see maize, we can see wheat as an example for this particular type of farming. And this subsistence farming is seen in thickly populated areas. Okay, why? Because in thickly populated areas, the amount of land that is there for cultivation would be very less, and people are very high. So obviously, people would be having a small amount of land which is available for agriculture. So there they will be focusing first on their survival, and if they are having any excess, then they will be selling them. Okay, and in thickly populated areas, we will be seeing this particular type of crop. Right, then the second type of thing is primitive subsistence farming. Even in this primitive subsistence farming, you will be seeing two. One, shifting. Then shifting is one of the example, and nomadic farming is another example for primitive type of primitive subsistence farming. Now the point here is, what is meant by shifting cultivation? In shifting cultivation, usually this shifting cultivation is done in thickly populated areas. For example, in Amazon basin, or in some parts of tropical areas of Africa, Southeast Asia. There you will be seeing this type of shifting cultivation. What happens in shifting cultivation? First they will be selecting one particular type of land, and from that, that area will be filled with a huge amount of trees. Now what they will be doing? They will be cutting off all the trees, and they will start cultivating that particular area. So there they will be doing cultivation for 2 to 3 years. After that, once the fertility of that soil has been reduced, they will be shifting to other place, and again the same cycle will be repeating there. So as a part of this shifting cultivation, you can see maize and potatoes as examples for that particular type of agricultural activity. And this shifting agriculture, we call that particular thing as an slash or burning agriculture. Then what is meant by nomadic? Nomadic agriculture or nomadic type of activity can be seen in semi-arid regions or arid regions. So what are the examples? Sahara is one of the example, and Central Asia is in Central Asia. Some of the semi-arid regions and the arid regions will be having this type of nomadic type of agriculture. So in nomadic type of agriculture, nomadic type of cultivation farming, they will be traveling or moving along with their pets, along with the domesticated animals. For example, goat, cow, camel, sheep. Okay, sheep, camel and goat would be the examples. Now from sheep they will be getting wool, from goat they will be getting meat and milk, and camel is used for transportation. The point here is, through animals they will be farming from one place, they will be moving from one place to another place. That particular type of farming, we call it as an nomadic cultivation. Now if you see in India, even in India we can see this type of nomadic cultivation, where in Rajasthan and in some parts of Jammu and Kashmir we see this nomadic farm. Okay. Now the second type is a commercial type of farming. So what happens in commercial type of farming? Obviously in commercial type of farming, as I told you earlier, the technology which we are using would be very high, and the amount of labors would be very less, and the area of cultivation would be very high. So if you see in most of the North American countries and European countries where the temperate grasslands are there, we can see this commercial farming in peak. And even in India also we will be having this commercial farming. But the point here is commercial farming is done where the population is very less, the spread of population is very less, or we can tell that in a sparsely populated area we will be having these commercial farms. Okay, and after that we will be having mixed type of mixed farming. See, in mixed farming what we will be doing? In mixed farming, along with the crop, along with the food, rearing of livestock also will happen. Okay, and this type of thing we can see in Europe, Eastern USA, Argentina, Southeast Australia, New Zealand and South Africa. Then plantations. See, plantations are one of the examples for this commercial farming. So what happens in plantation? Single crop of tea, sugar, coffee, cashew, rubber, banana and cotton are grown. And the point here is in this particular type of farming we need a large amount of labor and a huge amount of capital. Okay, then we should understand major plantations that were present in cultivation. If you see the major plantations, usually they are found in tropical regions. So what is the tropical region? Again, the area between Tropic of Cancer and Tropic of Capricorn, that particular region is called as tropical region. So if you see some of the examples of these major plantations, rice is one of the major plantation, wheat is one of the major plantation, millets is one of the major plantation. Okay, and cotton is also one of the major plantation, jute and coffee, tea. So these are the important major plantation or major crops that we are having. Okay, now here we should understand what is meant by agricultural development. So what is meant by agricultural development, or the ultimate aim of agricultural development is to increase food security. So how this agricultural development can be done? Agricultural development can be done by increasing the farm production. So in what ways we can increase the farm production? Point number 1, by increasing the cropped area. Point number 2, by increasing the number of crops that we are growing. Point number 3, by improving the irrigation facilities. Point number 4 is use of high yield fertilizers and high yield variety of seeds, as well as using of fertilizers would be one of the example for which can be taken for development of agriculture. And fifth point would be mechanization. Okay, using lot of machines in production. So in farming, that is also one of the example for agricultural, in order to make this agricultural development. Okay, so as I told you earlier, the ultimate aim for this agricultural development is increasing the food security of that particular area or that particular country or that particular region. Okay, right. Now see, the farm in India, a farm in USA is obviously different. Why? Because India is an a densely populated country, while America is an sparsely populated country. In India, we follow generally subsistence type of agriculture. Majority of agriculture is subsistence type of agriculture. And in USA, we will be following commercial agriculture because the availability of land is high. The technology is very more. Okay, but in India, comparatively to America, the technology is very less. Population is also very high. Area is also very less. That is why we will be following subsistence agriculture here. Obviously, if you see the nature, the land holding capacity of an individual would be very less in terms of India, while in America, they will be having a huge amount of land. Okay, so that is the major difference. That is the farming difference between India and USA. So all the characteristics of subsistence agriculture would be applicable to India. All the characteristics of farming agriculture would be applicable to USA. So in this particular chapter as well, he has mentioned that only, and he has given certain examples in order to make us understand. Okay, so there is nothing much to read these stories here, but the point we should understand is India is having less amount of and a huge population. Because of that, subsistence agricultural is majorly done in India. In America, it is quite opposite. Commercial form of agriculture is done in America. So with that, we have finished this chapter, agriculture. So in next class, we will be meeting with the next chapter. Until then, thank you so much for watching this video. If you are having any doubts, let me know in comment section.